Before we begin, a disclaimer: this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for any investment decision. Nothing you hear is an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any security. The securities discussed on this podcast may be owned by persons being interviewed. Before making any investment decision, please consult an investment advisor.
Yeah, so just to kick things off here, we've both covered software companies in the past, and we've owned them at various points. Today, I have a position in Constellation Software.
Me too.
It's not a huge position or anything. Yeah, so you've got some exposure, and you've got some other software stuff in there, right?
Veeva, yeah. Veeva and
okay.
Constellation. I think those two are the primary exposure in like software companies that we typically talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, software, it's obviously been selling off pretty hard over the last year or so on AI disruption fears. And I think like one of the challenges with this compared to your garden variety sell-off related to macro and timing related stuff is that it's really hard to have a grasp on the boundaries of AI's capabilities 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And so, I sometimes find myself just looking at even the massive advances that AI has made in just the last 2 years, even the last 1 year. And I wonder, should I be extrapolating this? Is it dumb to extrapolate? Or is it dumb not to?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Should we just assume things accelerate even further through some self-recursion loop? And there's a growing consensus, I think, in the AI community that we may be talking literally about creating general cognition in the form of these agents that can exceed humans at almost any cognitive task, and that may be able to navigate, gray areas better and make better judgment calls. And I think, pushed to the extreme, we're talking about just like an entirely new paradigm, almost analogous to like being visited by a superior alien species, right? Like if we knew like an alien species that was orders of magnitude smarter than us was on its way to Earth and only like 5 years away, where would global equities trade, right? I mean, we would be talking about just probably up. That's right. we would be talking about just the fattest of all tails, right? And
right.
And anyway, I say this because it feels like in any discussion of SaaS, we can talk about the nuances between vertical and horizontal software, domain knowledge, regulatory workflows, systems of record, data gravity, and so on. But then it's like, anyone can just throw down this trump card of, but what if we get the true AGI, right?
Yeah.
And there isn't this, slam dunk insurmountable defense against that. It strikes me as both possible and unfalsifiable. So, if you're betting on SaaS at these multiples, let's call it anywhere between 15 times and 30 times, that sort of range, that's still a bet on terminal value, right? And
for sure, yeah.
And and it seemed to me that you are sort of implicitly making the bet that as powerful as AGI gets, it doesn't get too powerful, right? Like it doesn't get into this realm of ASI and like the paradigm that we sort of are familiar with today, where we have an infrastructure layer, platform layer, we have like applications and services on top, and that we're talking about mostly distinct players in each of those layers.
Mm-hmm.
That remains more or less largely intact. Now, like, truth be told, like as ignorant as I am about how all of this will play out, I personally don't really like the AI will do it all claim as an argument. Like just as an argument, because like at that point you can kind of tell yourself anything you want, right?
In some ways, David, I feel like if your argument is, AI will just do it all, it's a freeing argument. Then because there's so many, like it's such a consequential and transformational technology, and it will have such a wide-ranging impact in a destructive way, and also in a more value creative way, that I feel like it's a kind of a mute point because there are so many stuff that will be worth zero, right? So, but also I think to your earlier point that you are saying that there's I don't know whether how to extrapolate these recent capabilities. I feel like there will certainly some capabilities which we we should or we can extrapolate, and then there will be some stuff that we cannot extrapolate. Like there
Mhm.
are just bottlenecks that will just you just get stuck there, right? Uh, and maybe if you solve one bottleneck, the other one shows up, and it just keeps going on and on and on, right? So to an extent, I feel like. Uh, will AI keep improving? The answer feels almost inevitably yes. But will AI keep improving in all possible dimensions going forward to the extent that it renders a lot of these businesses worthless, right?
Yeah, there's kind of like two questions here, which is like, one, will AI keep improving? I think there's kind of consensus agreement that
Yeah,
it will. And then
yeah.
there's a second question of, does it raise the floor for everyone, right? Or
Mm,
does it does it serve like a replacement, a large scale replacement type of role? And yeah, and I think, there's obviously that Citrini report that was circulated that seemed to maybe lean more towards the latter. And you know, first of all, I'll just say, like, I felt like the amount of anger that Citrini got for writing that report was just totally ridiculous and
yep,
uncalled for. I
yep,
think there should be nothing offensive about people sharing doomer scenarios. Um, like, my issue with the Citrini piece, it wasn't about the fact that it was bearish. Like, I don't care about that. It
yeah,
was, I just thought it was more that it sort of misconstrued how certain businesses and industries function and what makes them competitively entrenched. And so like, you can imagine a dialogue between the two of us. Maybe maybe I'll say to you,
mm-hmm,
hey, MBI, here's a doomer scenario. In 5 years, the moon will get close enough to the Earth that the strength of the tides will double and trigger global flooding, right? And
yeah.
then you'll say to me, "Well, that's dumb. That misunderstands how gravity works." And I'll say to you, "Whoa, hey man, I'm just imagining a doomer scenario. I'm not making a prediction, right?" And so you see the issue here, right? Like,
Yeah,
anyone can say doomerish things, but for doomer scenarios to be interesting, they have to be grounded in an understanding of the relevant underlying dynamics, right? And so, I thought, like, maybe in a few spots the report was missing that foundation. So, like, it's
yeah.
fine to express the view like DoorDash is in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if the premise underlying that view is that DoorDash's moat is literally, oh, you're hungry, you're lazy, and this is the app on your home screen. And I'm not, straw manning here. That's just literally the what a direct quote here.
Mm-hmm.
You're not starting from a good foundation, right? Do you know what I mean? And so, but like, nothing to get upset about, right?
No,
You could disagree with specific
I
points,
would
but it's
say,
silly to
yeah,
be angry
it
about
was
it.
very
Yeah.
strange and peculiar to me that some people got angry about, Saitrani posting about, a doomer scenario. And he was pretty explicit about it. This is like a hypothetical scenario and all that. I thought I was also a bit surprised when they become a bit too defensive, when people are kind of,
Hmm.
making kind of an outlandish accusations about them. Then they were trying to defend that hypothetical scenario a bit too much, and then it became almost nonsensical in certain areas.
Hmm.
That's when they kind of lost me a bit.
Okay, I didn't see that part, but yeah,
Yeah, but I
yeah.
definitely see the point. I definitely think they have every right, and it's probably a good exercise to imagine things like when you are investing based on fundamentals. I feel like if you're just looking at the past and just saying, oh, it will extrapolate like at this rate, that's not necessarily a fundamental investing. Like almost anyone can do that. All the quants are definitely all over it. If you are investing based on fundamentals and on some level and capacity, you have to imagine the future, like and figure out where's the risk rewards are probably mismatched, and you are not going to be right in many cases, right? Because you are imagining things. Sometimes you imagine things that are not there, right? And the bet is if you're a well-calibrated investor, you will be right more often than you are wrong, or you'll be right emphatically when you are right, so that the mistakes are kind of completely evaporated from the overall tally. So I definitely see the point, and I actually think it's very important for fundamental investors to imagine the future, like how the near terms will look like, maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Because if you're buying anything for 15, 20, 30, 40 times of multiples, you are signing up for a lot of terminal value.
I mean, it was kind of shocking, like that port had such a huge impact. And I think, frankly, like even Citrini was shocked by the reception
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
quite frankly, I didn't like, this is not a knock on Citrini or anything like that, but I didn't think like the thought experiments were particularly groundbreaking or anything. They were written in in organized and captivating ways. But like, if you're a professional money manager and you're actively investing in stocks and this is like the first time you've thought about this stuff and you're freaking out about it, like I'm not so sure you should be managing money. Although I think maybe the more likely explanation is people were selling in anticipation of other people selling or something. I don't know. But I was just surprised by how the market spasmed down on that report.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, so with all this, like, hand wringing and all these concerns around AI's impact on SaaS, I guess I wanted to like think of an example of like a software company that would that could be more on like the insulated side of the spectrum. Play on easy mode a little bit, like which software companies might fall into that camp. So the software company that I had in mind was Veeva, right? And we both wrote about it pretty recently, so I thought it'd be like a good one to talk about. And so I'll just kind of lay the groundwork as
Sure.
I kind of the background as I kind of see it. So Veeva founded in 2007 as a CRM system that was dedicated to the life sciences industry, and it was built on top of Salesforce.com's Force.com platform. And and so, one of the things that makes CRM software useful is data, right? So it helps for pharma reps who use Veeva CRM to know, where the doctors are, what their specialties are, their hospital affiliations, their contact details, all that kind of stuff. And the industry standard for that kind of data, it comes from this company called IQVIA. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is the largest CRO. And they sell this data product called OneKey that has all this information that the industry uses. So CRO, by the way, that's short for Contract Research Organization, and these are basically organizations that run clinical trials on behalf of pharma companies.
Right.
But in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, Veeva built their own version of OneKey called Open Data. And then a few years after that, IQVIA then blocked all pharma companies from being able to upload its OneKey data into Veeva software. So then the two companies sued each other, and basically for about like a solid decade, they were locked in this commercial standstill. And during this time, they sort of increasingly stepped into each other's territory. So IQVIA bought several CRM targets to build a competing CRM to Veeva. And then Veeva was also at the same time building out its own data sets. And so, IQVIA's CRM, it never really took off. And then finally, a few years ago, they just licensed their CRM software to Salesforce.
Yeah.
And so I think what that means is like IQVIA is going to, market the software, but Salesforce, for all intents and purposes, is in control of like the actual product.
Right.
So with IQVIA, basically no longer competing with Veeva and CRM, the two companies, they struck an agreement last year where where now like Veeva is allowed to use IQVIA's data and its software. And so this was kind of like the first obstacle to Veeva's commercial business that was essentially removed. And the second one was that Veeva CRM was built on Salesforce,
Yep.
Salesforce's platform. And as a result of that, there were apparently some, technical I couldn't get into the details on this, but apparently some technical limitations on what it could build. So then starting maybe like 2.5 years ago or so, it began to migrate its CRM off of Salesforce and onto its own platform architecture called Veeva Vault. So those were the two long-standing obstacles. It was, the data part. They got rid of that with that agreement with IQVIA, and then now they have their own, undergirding platform for their own CRM. But that said, there are other constraints. So, for starters, like CRM, it's a mature market for Veeva. It already has like 80% share, something like that in the vertical. So it's
kind of crazy. Like CRM used to be like almost 75% of their revenue, like probably a decade ago. Now it's like 20%, and it's going to be like 10%, I think, in 5 years or so.
yeah.
So it's kind of incredible to think when Viva was started. Obviously, they started with the promise of just CRM, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
there's all these other kind of tentacles that kind of they built over time, and now CRM is going to be almost a negligible part of their business, like in 5 years.
Yeah, and like it's one definitely gets a sense when you listen to their earnings calls, and that their CRM is increasingly being put on the back burner. And not only is it like a market opportunity that they have like pretty dominant share in, but also they face this new competitor with Salesforce now, who might arguably be even a stronger competitor than IQVIA, who they used to compete with. And so, like Veeva used to have 18 of the top 20 biopharmas as CRM customers, and now they're saying that they'll be able to keep maybe 14 of the 20. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also there's just this concern that like biopharmas have been cutting their sales forces in prior years. And then
It's been going on for a while, like 5 years
and
or
you could
so.
see that continuing through like AI productivity gains.
For
And
sure.
I kind of feel like, CRM, it's kind of one of those categories that seems really directly in the crosshairs of AI. So there's some, some hair around that. And then it's also like a seat-based, revenue model. So there's just like,
all the bad
I don't know.
stuff in the single thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so it definitely feels like, management has been de-emphasizing CRM. As you said, it's on its way to like 10% of revenue by 2030 or something. And so instead they've been looking towards like the R&D related software as the growth driver. And by R&D software, what I'm referring to there, it's basically software that's used to, manage the process of running clinical trials. All right. So clinical trials, they're the biggest part of pharma's R&D budget. They're like really intricate processes. There are human lives on the line, lots of money at stake. So it's a process that's subject to a huge amount of regulatory scrutiny. And I won't get into like all the steps involved. You can I wrote about that in the recent write-up, but basically I think you can think of clinical trials as this very complicated production line whose end product is a submission package with the FDA. That's how I kind of mentally think about it. It's like a sponsor. They need to first they need to come up with a playbook on how the study is going to be run, the responsibilities of everyone involved, how any sort of exceptions or deviations from that blueprint are going to be handled, how to address all the safety issues that come up. All the paperwork, the documents, the signed contracts, all that stuff needs to be like stored somewhere, right? And
I think in your write-up you have this kind of kind of a journey of a workflow from beginning to end. I think that was super helpful because in that journey you kind of sort of laid out how different Viva products come into play and how that those products actually play a role in that entire kind of workflow. I think that was very helpful to kind of visualize uh, those products value proposition along the way.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think it also helped me appreciate how some of the competitive advantage that comes into play, uh, given how Viva's multiple products are kind of interwoven into that life cycle of the workflow.
Yeah, that's right. And so, yeah, I think, it's, when you even just something like enrolling trial participants, something like that. Like, I mean, you need to, um, you need to take down their weight, their age, their medication history, all that stuff. You need to like randomize those patients into control groups, treatment groups. And then you need to make sure that the placebos go to the right patients, actual drugs go to the right patients. And then when like the blood samples go to the centralized lab, then the lab needs to make sure there's a clear audit trail or chain of custody, right, for the samples, and then keep track of all these abnormal readings. And then there's like many sites that are doing this simultaneously, right? So you
Yeah.
have to be able to look across all of these sites and make sure everything's happening according to plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you imagine like, look, okay, well, maybe during the trials, there's a patient that has some serious adverse side effect, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well then that triggers another workflow. Okay, what was the root cause? What was the process? Was it like a process failure, or was it something else? If it was a process failure, how do you fix it? Like, how do you know the remedies were put into place after you figure out like a plan? And then there towards the end, there's this whole like rigmarole around making sure like all the documents that need to be filed with the FDA are in exactly the right formatting, right? You have in exactly the right place. And so like, yeah, the point is just like each of these steps, they kind of trigger um like a flurry of patient data and contracts and supporting documents and all this stuff. It needs to be stored, and there needs to be like an audit trail that keeps track of like who did what, why, and every action just triggers more and more of these steps. And so the point is, it's a massive like compliance exercise where like every event has to be paper trailed and tracked so you can like justify and defend the results of the trial
Yeah.
to the regulators, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, when I was reading your piece, I had this kind of, couple of sentences highlighted, which I think is probably relevant to mention here. So you wrote, each step of the workflow begets its own burst of data, documents, and approvals, while also activating the next step, which triggers its own deluge of records and sign-offs, and so on. And it is a chain reaction of dependent regulatorily mandated steps inherent in clinical trials that provides a business logic for why a sponsor or CRO would choose to standardize on Viva rather than a juggle of patchwork of point solutions. I think the dependence, the and how each of those components of the workflow feeds to each other, and how that leads to more data, more dependence, going forward. I think is not something that is prevalent in most software. So, for example, in some sense, I feel like, okay, Microsoft Office is just very cheap now because you get to do like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and a bunch of other stuff for like, right now, I think $120 or $130 per year. But the reality is, I only use Microsoft Excel, and I actually don't use anything else.
Yeah.
So in that sense, and the fact that I'm not using Microsoft Word and I'm using like, let's say Substack's own, a document editor, or like maybe Google Docs, right? It has no implication, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't hinder me at all for not using Microsoft Word, right? Or even if I used Microsoft Word, it would not really make things any easier, to do my job. So yeah, I think it's definitely not common. It's not prevalent in most softwares, like it is for someone like Veeva.
Yeah. So like, I think, yeah, once you understand like how all these workflows in a clinical trial kind of feed into each other, the more the business logic um, for what Veeva is trying to do, like, which is create this one kind of unified platform makes sense.
Yep.
And then I feel like the more you buy into that thesis, the more insulated Veeva looks from the standpoint of like AI disruption. Because
Right.
like, I think, you know, well, first of all, like these products themselves are like the systems of record for trials, and like all systems of record, they're just very hard to replace, right? And then second, like we're dealing with this regulatory output that can't be messed up. So when a client is like when a pharma is thinking about like what software to buy, they look around and see what other sophisticated peers are using.
Right.
Um, and so this is kind of a similar dynamic that plays out with like a system of record, like Guidewire and PNC Insurance, like in these kind of domains where where they're shopping around these regulated domains where they're shopping around for a mission critical system. It's that classic cliche of like, you know, you don't get fired for IBM. That really does come
Applies.
into
Yep.
play,
Yep.
I think. Yeah. And then, you know, I like even if AI, you know, a lot, and there's a lot of domain knowledge to these clinical trials. And I feel like even if AI comes in and allows domain experts to trivially instantiate their knowledge into code, when it comes to like clinical trials, all these domain experts are touching different parts of the elephant. Do you know what I mean? Like, so like
Yep.
maybe you have safety experts who can build the safety suite, but to match Veeva's unified offering, they'd have to also build the expertise in like EDC and CTMS and QMS and all these other like acronyms. Um, and then so like, and then you know, finally there's this concern that like systems of records are these dumb pipes, right?
Yeah.
And all the value will come from the agents that do
Yeah.
all the work on top, like system of engagement. I don't know what they call it these days, but like this is kind of a thesis that I think has been like gaining some momentum. Like it's um you know, now it's kind of like a straw man to say like, oh yeah, you're not going to vibe code your own, you know, whatever
Uh-huh.
CRM or system of record.
Uh-huh.
But like the new thing to say is like, no, there's going to be agents who extract all the value, not the system of record, right? And so I just feel like there's this like, I don't even really know where this comes from, but I feel like there's like this default assumption that like these agents will be separate from the system of record, right?
Uh-huh.
Like it would be its own thing. Like so, and I think like maybe you can understand that for some of these horizontal
Yep.
um systems, like you were like the example you were giving with Microsoft. Like you could use Excel, but that doesn't mean you have to use like Word. Like you could use Google Doc. There's
Yep.
other like options out there. Um, and so like because like often those workflows uh you know they kind of like like HR workflows blend with productivity workflows, which blend with CRM workflows. So you can imagine sort of agents wanting to have some agent layer that goes across them.
Uh-huh.
But like with clinical trials, like that's, you know, pretty much like a self-contained process, right? Like all the software that's used to manage it belongs together. And for the most part, they don't need to touch other enterprise systems. So like it would just seem to me like if agents do end up creating or like claiming the most value on top, like those agents will just be Vivas and not some like third party agent with less context. I mean, I almost kind of feel like it's sort of similar to I know we both talked about like um and wrote about Cadence and Synopsys in the past, and they're developing AI agents there too. It's almost like that. Like you know,
Uh-huh.
it's when you're talking about like semiconductor design, that's kind of like a self-contained process, and like I just kind of feel like in those cases, the context that these agents need to like those are kind of like best. It just would seem more obvious to me that the default by default the agents would be part of the of those tools, right?
I
I
think
don't
as
know.
long as the execution of some of these incumbent software companies is not like disastrous, like for
Yeah.
example, if your customer can build a better agent using,
Yeah.
let's say, cloud's platform versus what you offer using, let's say, cloud's platform, that's a disaster, right? Then
Right.
obviously you have no business in making it, or in generating any revenue from your customer base. But that, to me, I share your sentiment. To me, that shouldn't be default position. That can happen. Some companies can totally bungle up execution and then seed the market opportunity to the startups, or to maybe even model developers, or to even vibe coders within their customer base, right? That is, yes, fine. That's a realm in the realm of possibility, but I don't consider that to be a default outcome.
Yeah.
From and again, from the even model developers perspective, it actually makes a lot more sense if uh, all these incumbent software companies use their models to popularize agents and grow the adoption, rather than using the scarce resource that these model developers have, which obviously have their own sort of limitations of generating more revenue, and not and making sure they're spending their dollars in the highest possible sort of ROI, right? So in some sense, it would make more sense to use these kind of incumbent software companies as some of their indirect sales force, right? To grow adoption of their model. So this narrative that these model developers should be in the business of disrupting this incumbent software almost feels slightly misguided. Like, you can say that bear case could be these incumbent software companies can become somewhat irrelevant over time, right? And to an extent, I feel like that's what's being priced in most of the software companies. Like, if we are talking about Veeva, for example, but what is Veeva trading at? Veeva is trading at today 20 times LTM EBITDA, right?
Hmm.
That's not market saying Viva is impaired because of AI or anything
Right.
like that, right? So it's saying, okay, you are supposed to grow your revenue at low to mid-teen rate, right? If that's true, then probably you are cheap, right? But market is saying maybe not. Maybe it's not going to be low to mid-teens, but maybe it's going to be closer to low double digits, right? And then
Yeah.
obviously that has its implications in margins and valuations and multiples, right? So to an extent, that's what's being currently priced in some software companies. Not everyone. There's software companies out there which is trading at 1, 2, 3, 4 times in revenue. So for those companies, the conversation is different. But yeah, to me, it feels like the kind of an extreme narratives in either direction are almost are trying to be deliberately provocative to kind of make the point, right? And not necessarily what the market has been pricing for for many of the thing is, I feel like, let's say if a company generates 15% IRR from today's price, right? Software company, versus, let's say, to me, that doesn't feel like a complete disregard of what's going on. Sometimes, because there's a rising volatility in terms of what the terminal state looks like, what the value proposition of some of the software companies looks like. To me, it feels in kind of okay if software companies are
Hmm.
priced at 15% let's say return. Obviously that's too high compared to what most of the people's cost of capital is, but to me it's not almost irresponsible behavior from investors. You can, sometimes I think Ben Evans made this point, he was saying back in post tech bubble in 2000s, people used to make all sorts of crazy nonsensical arguments about why this and that stock should go down. Those are it used to be very stupid arguments. But the stock still did go down, not because, maybe it initially reacted just due to those stupid arguments, but over time, this kind of realization set in that there are actual reasons to be worried about. There are actual reasons. Like, for example, if you were underwriting Veeva's earnings to grow at 25% CAGR in the next 5 years, and then you have to kind of, reassess, oh no, it's not going to be 25%, it's going to be 18%. Then you have to kind of so I feel like, a lot of that is going on. There are legitimate things to be worried about software. There are also legitimate things to feel like, okay, maybe market is overreacting in some corners. And I think that's how it's going to be. I feel like software as a whole is not a super attractive place if you are investing for the next 5 to 10 years, right? But won't there be spots within that overall space to find attractive opportunities which would beat the market? Of course there will be. That's how it's always going to be, right? But right now, I think there are just too many noises and too many, uncertainty that all companies are being kind of treated in a similar way. But over time, I think market will self-correct, and as more clarity kind of comes to the scene, I feel like those discernibility will improve, and the stocks will be priced appropriately.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that a lot.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the correction is kind of healthy. I mean, when I look at Veeva here, in late 2025, it was almost $300. Right?
Yeah. A few months ago.
And so if I look at their multiple today, what is that earnings? Maybe 30 times earnings or something like that.
Next 12 months or last 12 months?
Last 12 months,
yeah,
maybe it's 30. Or maybe it's mid 20s on a forward basis. That seems reasonable to me. But it also implies that when they were trading at 300 and above, that okay, maybe that was a little tippy toppy, and so I think there has been a lot, even with the sell off, I find that when I look across all these names, it's not the names that are really bombed out, right?
There's Atlassian, there's GitLab, right? Those are really bombed out.
Then I think, okay, I can see that, right? And then, but some of these other ones, Veeva or S&P and Moody's, whatever, those have corrected, and I find myself thinking okay, these could be reasonable bets going forward, but I'm not oh my God, this is an incredible disconnect between value and price here.
That's what I noticed. When I look at some of these kind of more reasonable names, kind of reasonable moats, still intact. I feel like when I look at them, I see low to mid teens are in the realm of possibility. It's not 25, 30% IRR stocks, right? Then you could say, oh, these are really kind of diverging from the long term reality of these businesses.
Yeah, agree. So that's Veeva. And I did get a question on Twitter. How do you develop your ability to come up with conclusions on the qualitative side of the business, and any resources you recommend for writing? As far as coming up with conclusions and approach to research, maybe I've said this before, but I really think it's important to approach things from the point of view of a judge rather than a lawyer, right? And then so what I mean by that is a lawyer's job is to make their client look good, right? so they care about knowing the negatives, but only so that they can find a way to rationalize it or show the court why it's not so bad, right? Where a judge, on the other hand, they're supposed to take more of an even-handed look at the evidence on both sides before coming to a ruling, right? And I kind of find that too many investors come at their research as though they were defense attorneys or something. Their job is to defend the company and highlight the positives and minimize the negatives.
David, you are reminding me of my business school class, because in business school, I remember a professor was, when he was kind of teaching how to make an argument and how to defend your arguments. And there's always this case that you have to when you are saying something that is opposed to your position, you have to mention the mitigant, right?
Right.
If you want to be a lawyer, that's totally fine. But if you are being an analyst, sometimes the mitigants are not good, right? Or there are actually genuine risks, but you are willing to take that risk, right?
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. If you are coming from a more of a lawyer perspective, the real world doesn't really depend on like the real world doesn't operate on the assumption of what you think are mitigants and what you think are what you think should happen. It's much more complex than that. So there's
Yeah.
always
And you know
risk, and
what's
there's
funny?
not enough mitigants out there.
Yeah. And speaking of business school, I remember like when we would, everyone would be preparing for interviews. And then when you would talk to the career consultant or whatever, in the investment management track, they would say, you have to defend your thesis. Always try to
Yep,
defend your thesis, right?
exactly.
And I think the reason they say that is like there's kind of like two ways to think about like investment research. You can think about it like, okay, I'm trying to triangulate towards the truth, or you can think about it like, well, I'm thinking about my job as a research analyst and how I can thrive as a research analyst inside a fund, right? Because like often, like when you're at a fund, you're trying to get your ideas into the portfolio, and you're
Yeah.
competing with other analysts who are trying to do the same.
Yep.
And so there's like this persuasion element that comes into play,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so and you could be tempted in those kinds of contexts um oversell your idea, right? And so I think just from like setting kind of that career considerations aside, I do think just from like a research perspective, you don't want like you don't want things to sound like they just came out of the company's PR department, right? It's just like like you keep in mind that you owe the company absolutely nothing. This isn't
Nothing.
your kid, it's not your wife. You don't need to go to bat for management. Um, and so that's just something I would say towards that. I think as far as like writing, resources go, I think nothing comes to mind other than like just try to read broadly. I would say, don't just limit yourself to business or finance either. Like open up some fiction every now and then. I think, um, business and finance writing, it's oftentimes so like cookie cutter. And I think maybe becoming even more so with with people just asking ChatGPT to write for
Yeah.
them, that I think maybe you can stand out with maybe a different style. I mean, I remember when, I read like Grant's Interest Rate Observer for the first time way back in, I don't know,
Yeah.
2006 or something. And I just remember thinking like, whoa, this is cool. Like this is a
For sure.
different kind of style. And here's another thing I've been thinking about recently is there's sometimes this tension that you need to navigate between like, being nuanced and like being a bore. Well, what's the point of writing anything at all? It's to try to, sometimes the point is to convince someone of something, right? And other times it's maybe to help better understand something yourself, right? And there's like different motives for writing. Um, but I think like in either case, like sometimes the best way to achieve your objective is to make a point stick, right? Like to make it memorable, make it clear. And then I think, sometimes bending over backwards to include all kinds of caveats, like sometimes that
Yep.
can get in the way. And like, I was reminded of this last year. I was reading a newsletter. Um, I won't say by who, but
Okay.
they took issue with Buffett's famous quote, like "Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful." And this person basically said, "Well, actually, let's rewrite the quote to say, like, be appropriately skeptical when others are optimistic, be optimistic when others are pessimistic, and never be cynical." Right? And and like this just provoked a huge eye roll from me because I was like, okay, first of all, everyone knows what Buffett means,
Yeah.
right? Like people are perfectly capable of adding nuance themselves. And then like the second thing is like this replacement quote
It's
of
not
his,
even
it's just
memorable.
so it's unmemorable. It's so pedantic and so puffed up that no one's going to remember it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
everyone's going to remember the Buffett quote, right?
Yeah.
And that matters when you're trying to convey a point, right? Like you don't want to treat your audience like they're idiots. I think like oftentimes people are capable of getting the gist of what you're trying to say. and filling in some of the blanks themselves. So you want to apply some judgment to this. I don't know where the line is between, too much nuance and not enough nuance. Like you want to be accurate, but you don't, and you want to be nuanced, but you don't want to come across um, as like treating your readers like they're idiots or something. And I just felt like Buffett's gift is that he navigates those competing concerns with like tremendous dexterity, right? He's just very
For
good
sure.
at saying things that are accurate and memorable, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
I don't know. I was just kind of reminded of um, like that mid twit meme.
Yeah.
You have the guy in the middle of a carousel. No, don't. It's not. Don't be fearful when others agree. It's be appropriately skeptical when others are optimistic.
That does sound like a midwit quote for sure. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
No, I think
That's what I would say.
I think those are excellent points. In some ways, I feel like so many people want or ask for these advice or suggestions. I feel like almost the most appropriate advice that anyone can give anybody is basically just start, just
Yeah.
actually start doing it. And even when I look back in my kind of writing endeavor, I feel like over time you have you have your own opinions about how you should write and how you should change, how you should kind of tailor things. And the thing is, I do believe writing is a distinct skill. At the same time, I can't wake up tomorrow and decide to write like you, right? You can't wake up tomorrow and decide to write like some other author, right?
Yeah.
So so I do think there's also a bit of that. Uh, in a way, it always also it always helped me to just think through like what would I want to read, right? And try to recreate that as much as possible. What would I want to read? And the bet is basically simple that there are many more people like me out there who would want to consume it. Just that to me, kind of keeps things simple. And the reason it is easier to be able to write what I myself would like to read is just I am probably reading a lot of the stuff, right? So growing a sense of taste and kind of interest. So I think that's probably easier to do than kind of trying to see, okay, that person writes so well, and that person I want to be like him or something like that, or him or her. Uh, that feels potentially more unattainable than just looking closely what you yourself are so drawn to, and then just try to kind of create that for other people.
Yeah. And I find that, like I just run across a lot more like AI slop these days. It's just things that were just clearly wholesale written by ChatGPT. And
For sure.
I just almost kind of find myself appreciating, writing that just has some humanity in it, right? Like it doesn't even have to be grammatically correct and just, and totally accurate. Like it doesn't have to be, quote unquote, good writing in this traditional sense. But I just find myself having more appreciation for like, okay, can I discern like the author's style here, right? Is there a little bit of just soul in this or something? I don't know what it is, but like I shared that essay with you yesterday that
Yeah.
talked about this, and you had carved out a quote from here that I thought was good, where he writes, the problem isn't that it hallucinates or makes mistakes. It's that everything it writes vaguely sucks. I drag my eyes across the words and I feel nothing. That's not quite right, actually. I feel like I would like this to be over as soon as possible. And I think like we've all kind of had that experience, right? Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
scroll through Twitter and there's more of that like AI stuff on there that, and like you just, there's just and it's like it's well written in the sense that the words aren't misspelled and it's like grammatically correct
Yeah.
and everything. There's just something like not something uncanny about it. I don't know. It just
Yeah,
doesn't
to
quite
me,
land. But
this has been the most astonishing thing over the last like 3-4 years. Like there are definitely things that surprise me on the on the upside in terms of how quickly AI kind of, accelerated. Uh, but the fact that the writing quality has kind of, remained stuck, I'd say over the last, couple of years, even probably more than a couple of years, is definitely surprising to me.
Yeah.
And it tells me, like you are kind of alluding, and I think the piece that you sent to me yesterday definitely hit this point home, that uh, there's something about actually experiencing the world, uh,
Yeah.
and I can, explain an experience that you have never experienced, but you still be able to kind of, grasp what I'm saying in a way that I think it's still very hard for AI to do, right?
Yeah.
And I also think AI, uh, it's very hard for it to be surprising, right? In terms of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
analogies and stuff like that. I think, uh, it's it definitely helps you understand if you're trying to kind of grasp a concept, or kind of understand a business or something like that. But to kind of uh, drive a point home, like if you are kind of using more sort of like a quixotic analogy, or like life experience, right? That feels very human to me, still,
Yeah.
right? uh but yeah.
And it's interesting because like there's ways in which like AI can be useful for writing, like just asking like, okay, can you critique this thing that I wrote? Like I think it's getting better at that kind of stuff. Or even what do you think of this paragraph? Like, is it balanced, right? That kind of stuff. I think it's actually pretty decent. That I think where it kind of runs into problems is when you just kind of say like, hey, take the wheel and just write it, write the
Yeah.
first draft, or something like that. I think it's when I actually find that like the other thing I think AI has a problem with is humor. I don't find it very funny, but we'll see. I don't know. Maybe all this will change
Yeah,
in
I
five
know. Who
years.
knows? May it
Yeah.
it, it can surprise. Just because it wasn't able to in the last few years doesn't mean it can't in the next few
Yeah.
years. Uh, but yeah, but I did read some OpenAI people's tweets that they did try to improve the quality of the writing, right? They did try
Okay.
to eliminate the M dashes and all that, and they
Yeah.
weren't able to, right? So there may be something structural in there. Who knows? Uh, but
Hmm.
yeah, like so far it feels like uh, uh, humans still have a shot when it comes to writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Uh, cool. I think we're good there.